Hi everyone, today we'll be covering pons. So pons is a part of your brainstem. On the top, you have your midbrain, then you have pons, and then you'll have your medulla oblongata. So pons basically joins midbrain to your medulla oblongata. When you talk about the position of pons, it's situated anterior to your cerebellum and it's 1 inch in length. Pons basically means bridge, and this is a bridge that connects the right and left cerebellar hemisphere. So basically, it's connecting the cerebellum. It's right and left hemisphere. Now, when you look at its external structure, so this is its external structure and this is the interior view. So when you talk about the interior view, you're going to see a convex groove. This is a convex groove, and this is basically the groove for your basilar artery. So your basilar artery passes through this. Then another very important feature that you should know about is this right here, which is your trigeminal nerve. So this thicker one here, this is the motor, sorry, the thicker one here, this is the sensory root of trigeminal nerve, and the thinner one here, that's the motor root for the trigeminal nerve. And how can you remember this with ease? The one medially, that's for your motor root of the trigeminal nerve, and the one that's situated more laterally, that's for the sensory root of your um, trigeminal nerve, and this is your motor root, right? So medially the motor root of trigeminal nerve, and laterally sensory root of trigeminal nerve, and it's also large, so lateral large, thicker one. Done. So we're done with the trigeminal nerve. Next, you can see these nerves which are originating here and then also towards this side. These are your sixth, seventh, and eighth cranial nerve, which is your abducens, facial, and your vestibulocochlear cranial nerve. And then, if you remember previously, this is your medulla. So right now we're focusing on this structure. This is pons. This is medulla, and we've already covered medulla, where I told you that you have your glossopharyngeal, you have vagus accessory, which arises from between your olives, between in the groove between your olives and between your inferior cerebellar peduncle, and then you had the hypoglossal nerve, which arises from the groove between your pyramids and the olives. I'm sure you remember that. So these were the nerves there. So you do not need to focus on them right now. You just need to focus on this region, which is the pons. And then, yes, so we've covered the facial nerve, vestibulocochlear nerve, and I told you this is the abducens, facial, and then vestibulocochlear nerve. We've covered this. And here you can see the middle cerebellar peduncle. You need to be focusing on the middle cerebellar peduncle. What exactly is this? So, for example, if this is your midbrain, pons, and medulla, midbrain, pons, and medulla, right, and then the spinal cord. So here also you're going to have your peduncle, the cerebellar peduncle. Here also you'll have a cerebellar peduncle, and here also. This is your superior cerebellar peduncle, and this is your middle cerebellar peduncle. This is your inferior cerebellar peduncle. So your pons has the middle cerebellar peduncle. So this is the one right here, middle cerebellar peduncle, right? So there's nothing special in this external view, right? And this is the posterior view. That was the interior external view, and this is the posterior external view. Now this is your pons region. So you have your middle cerebellar peduncle, this one right here, but you can also see the superior cerebellar peduncle, even though you shouldn't be seeing this here because this should be a part of your midbrain, right? Your midbrain has the superior cerebellar peduncle, but to an extent, they've also shown its branch here. Not branch, but like it's sort of its part here, right? And you'll see this clearly in your transfer section as well, even though you shouldn't be seeing it there, but it is there. Okay, now what you need to focus in here is, first of all, right in the center, this is the median sulcus. So just keep that in mind. This is your median sulcus, and after the median sulcus, you will have your right here, this is the medial eminence. This is the medial eminence, and the line that is basically limiting your median eminence is the sulcus limitans. So median sulcus, medial eminence, and then sulcus limitans. So I hope that makes sense. First in the middle, median sulcus, then medial eminence, then sulcus limitans. Right now, And then we've covered superior cerebellar peduncle, and then this is the middle cerebellar peduncle. This is the vestibular area. Why? Because this contains the vestibuli nuclei. So basically, the nuclei of the vestibular nerve, right? So it has a lot of nuclei for that. And then this is the facial colliculus. What is facial colliculus? That is basically you're going to notice that you will have, yeah, so you'll have the nucleus of abducens nerve, right, right in the center, and then uh, its fiber is going to pass straight. But for the facial nerve, its nucleus will be here, and the fiber is going to wind around your abducens nerve. So this entire winding around of the facial nerve fiber around the abducens nerve nuclei, this is going to create a facial colliculus, sort of an eminence, or like a protruded area, which is a facial colliculus. Done. And then substantia ferruginea, quite a fancy name. Over here in this region, you will find, not exactly in the region, but deep underneath it, underlying it, are your neurons or nerve fibers that have a lot of pigment to them. So they have like a colored appearance to them. Hence, this uh, region is given a name, substantia ferruginea. So this is the posterior view. Now let's just give it a quick reading, and let's see if we missed out something. So the anterior surface is convex, and it shows a lot of transverse fibers that converge on each side to form the middle cerebellar peduncle, and it has a shallow groove which contains your basilar artery, and this is known as the basilar groove. Then on the anterolateral surface of the pons, the trigeminal nerve emerges on each side, each anterolateral, so anterior but lateral. A trigeminal nerve emerges on each side. Each nerve consists of a smaller medial part, which is the motor part, and then a larger lateral part, which is the sensory root of your trigeminal nerve. In the groove between the pons and the medulla oblongata, from medial to lateral, abducens, facial, and vestibular cochlear nerves emerge. Now, this is very important. This is something that you should know. Actually, you know what, this should be highlighted. So I'll just write it down here so that you don't forget it. So they're saying in the junction which is there present between your pons and medulla, right here. Yeah, in this junction you have your cranial nerve 6, 7, and 8, which is the abducens, facial, and vestibulocochlear nerve. So right at this junction. Then the posterior surface of the pons is hidden from the view by the cerebellum. So in order to see the posterior view, you have to completely remove the cerebellum. And it forms the upper half of the floor of the fourth ventricle and is triangular in shape. So I told you you have a central canal, and towards the top, this cavity expands into the floor of the fourth ventricle. Posterior surface is limited laterally by the superior cerebellar peduncle, and it is divided into symmetrical halves by the median sulcus. Lateral to the sulcus is an elongated elevation, the medial eminence, which is bounded laterally by the sulcus limitans. So I remember telling you in order that first you have the median sulcus, then there's medial eminence here, and this limiting point is the sulcus limitans. The inferior end of the medial eminence is slightly expanded to form the facial colliculus, which is produced by the root of the facial nerve binding around the nucleus of the abducens nerve. So this is abducens nerve nucleus, okay, and this is the nerve. And then you have your facial nerve nucleus, and its fiber winds around in this fashion, right? So it's basically produced by the winding around of the facial nerve around the nucleus of the abducens nerve. Now, the floor of the superior part of the sulcus limitans is bluish gray in color and is called the substantia ferruginea. It owes its color to a group of deeply pigmented nerve cells. Lateral to the sulcus limitans is the area vestibuli, which is produced by underlying vestibular nuclei. So I'm sure I've covered everything. Now let's move towards the internal structure. Trust me, there's no point of reading the theory when it comes to the internal structure. You just need to look at the diagram and make a comparison between the two. So first of all, this is a transverse section which is through the caudal part of the pons at the level of the facial colliculus. Okay, now let me just give you a picture first. So whenever you're looking at the transverse section, you have to look at it at two levels. One is at the level of your facial colliculus, and the other is at the level of your what do you call it? The trigeminal nerve. Actually, let me just do something. Trigeminal nerve. So facial colliculus level is lower, and trigeminal nerve, that level is on the top. So this is your cranial portion, and this is your caudal portion, right? So yes, right here. So this is the transverse section to the pons at the level of the trigeminal nuclei. So trigeminal nuclei and then the facial colliculus level. This is the cranial and this is the caudal. So, but first let's look at the caudal because that image is first in the book. So let's look at it at the caudal level, transverse section at the caudal level, which is at the level of the facial colliculus. So yeah, one is anteriorly at this level of the trigeminal nerve, transverse section, and one is, if you look at it posteriorly, you'll see facial colliculus, the inferior caudal level. So let's look at the caudal level. First of all, the first thing first, this is your cavity of the fourth ventricle. This is your superior medullary velum. This is your medial longitudinal fasciculus. Now, medial longitudinal fasciculus, a very important thing about this, that this has the fibers of your third, fourth, sixth, and eighth cranial nerve, right? So this has the fibers of your third, fourth, sixth, and eighth cranial nerve. Then after medial longitudinal fasciculus, cavity, and then the superior medullary velum, let's look at something. This is the superior cerebellar peduncle. Remember, I told you you'll see that in transverse section clearly, even though you shouldn't be seeing this here because this should be in your midbrain and not your pons. But this is there because it's just there, right? And in fact, even inferior cerebellar peduncle is there. Middle is there, rightfully so, it should be there, but even the inferior one is here, right? And you'll notice that in this level, which is more of at a cranial level, here you're not going to see the inferior cerebellar peduncle because this is at a more of cranial level. So you'll see the superior cerebellar peduncle even greater or even larger here because this is closer to your midbrain, but it's far off from your medulla oblongata, so you're not going to see the inferior cerebellar peduncle. You're not going to see that here. So I hope I'm making sense. Anyways, you can still see superior cerebellar peduncle here. You still can see inferior cerebellar peduncle. I'm actually trying to cross it off because you shouldn't be seeing them, but it's fine if they're there. So middle cerebellar peduncle is there. Now you can also see the vestibular nuclei. So I remember I told you previously that vestibular, your vestibular cochlear nerve, it has, or you can say vestibular cochlear nuclei or nerve, it has a vestibular part and it has a cochlear part. The vestibular part had a superior, inferior, and a medial lateral. Remember? Superior, inferior, and medial lateral, and the cochlear part had anterior and posterior nuclei. We studied this in our medulla oblongata lecture, and there I told you that your in the transverse section of your medulla oblongata, you clearly see the medial and inferior nuclei of the uh, vestibular nuclei, basically. But and you could see both of the anterior and posterior as well, but you couldn't see the lateral and superior. So in this case, you can see lateral and superior. Actually, there you could see lateral at one point, which was at the level just inferior to the pons, if I clearly remember. But here you can see the lateral and superior. Actually, this much detail isn't required here, but still for the sake, because you already know this knowledge, so I was like, let's not, why not, just give it to you. So here you have your lateral and superior nuclei, and you also have the anterior and posterior cochlear, but right now we're just talking about the vestibular. So yeah, so we're also done with this. Now moving on, this is the reticular formation. I'm sure you already know that. And you can see spinal tract of nucleus, a spinal tract and the nucleus of trigeminal nerve. So remember I told you the nucleus is medial and tract was lateral in your medulla. Same case is here as well. And this is the same, continues here as well. Now this is the one thing that I was talking about. So this is the abducens nerve and its nucleus, right? So nucleus of the abducens nerve, it's mentioned here. And then this is the motor nucleus of the facial nerve. And the root of the facial nerve, it winds around your abducens nerve nucleus, right? So same thing here. This is your abducens nerve, right? And this is abducens nucleus. This is your facial nucleus, and its root winds around your abducens nerve. So yeah, that's about it. And this is your medial lemniscus, very important. Medial lemniscus, basically, these are the fibers from your dorsal pathway. And then in the center, you'll see the trapezoid body. Trapezoid body actually contains your cochlear and trapezoid nuclei. So, what does your trapezoid body contain? It contains nuclei of cochlear, cochlear and trapezoid nuclei. So, this is what it contains, your trapezoid body, right? So, yeah, we've covered everything. Okay, and one more thing that I should have mentioned in the starting, that this is your, again, this is your, the posterior region is your tegmentum area, and this is your basilar area, right? And your basilar area, so basically this is your tegmentum and this is your basilar area. Now your basilar area, it contains all the tracts. What does your basilar area contain? Mainly it contains the tracts. What sort of tracts? Now here let's give them a read. Actually, let's first look at the diagram. So here you can see these are the pontine nuclei, right? And pontine nuclei, I told you they're there in pons, and then they also diffuse down to medulla at the level of medulla, but then there they were known as arcuate nuclei. Remember? Now these pontine nuclei, what they do is that you have your corticopontine fibers which are coming from your midbrain, right? When they come down and when they come at this level of your at the level of your pontine, so basically these are coming in the way, right? The pontine nuclei, they're coming in the way of your corticospinal fibers. So these corticospinal fibers, they end here at the level of pontine in pons. So they finish and they terminate. From here onwards, you have new transverse fibers that originate, and these they move transversely and then they enter your cerebellum through your inferior. Sorry, here you have your middle cerebellar peduncle. So through your middle cerebellar peduncle, they enter the cerebellum. So this was a very important piece of information. Let me recap. You have corticospinal fibers which are coming down from your midbrain, and when they come here at the level of your pontine nuclei, here they terminate in pons. Okay? Right from here, you will have the origination of your transverse fibers which are going to travel laterally and into your middle, into your cerebellum via your middle cerebellar peduncle. So yeah, that's pretty much about it. So this we've covered your at the level of your facial colliculus, which is the caudal level. Now let's look at the cranial level. This is your cavity of the fourth ventricle. This is medial longitudinal fasciculus, which contains the nuclei of your third, fourth, sixth, and eighth cranial nerve. This is your superior medullary velum, and then this is your superior cerebellar peduncle. You won't be seeing your inferior cerebellar peduncle here, and then you have this middle cerebellar peduncle, right? You have now you also have the reticular formation. You also have the medial lemniscus. You also have the trapezoid body, which contains the nuclei of your, which contains the cochlear nuclei and the trapezoid nuclei. You can also see a spinal lemniscus here. Wow, that's nice. And finally, there's a change complete, like every time would always see the sensory nucleus and the tract, right? Would always see the spinal tract and the nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, but finally we are seeing the principal nucleus of your trigeminal nerve. So the principal motor and the principal sensory nucleus, we're seeing both of them. And motor, I told you, that's situated medially. So motor and sensory, the principal nuclei of trigeminal nerve, we're finally seeing them. So that's another difference. One was that you cannot see in inferior cerebellar peduncle, and then this is the other difference, right? And then the same thing, corticospinal fibers, they come here, they terminate at the level of the pontine. So see, bundles of corticospinal and corticonuclear fibers, they come here, they terminate at the level of your uh, pontine nuclei. Pontine nuclei, it's not labeled here, but it's here, right? Pontine nuclei, and then they travel transversely. So you have transverse pontine fibers. So these are known as your transverse pontine fibers, and where the middle cerebellar peduncle, they go into the cerebellum. So that's pretty much it. Now I'm sure you must have noticed a lot of, not exactly a lot, but there are a few differences. So let's just jot them down. First of all, okay, I'll write the caudal first so that you guys do not get confused, because we studied caudal first and then we studied the cranial, because that's the way they are written in the book. So caudal and cranial. So just for clarification, caudal is at the level of the facial colliculus, and the cranial are at the level of the cranial nerve. the fifth cranial nerve, which is the trigeminal nerve. Yeah. And then, yeah, at the level of the cranial nerve nucleus. Right. So let's look at the first difference. Okay, so your cranial level, it does not have the inferior um, cerebellar peduncle. Inferior cerebellar peduncle is not here. It was there. Then the other difference I told you was finally this has the principal nucleus of the fifth cranial nerve, which is the trigeminal nerve. Here you just had the spinal tract, spinal nucleus and tract of your fifth cranial nerve. This is the other difference. Very important difference is that at the caudal level, you could see, what could you see? This is the caudal level. You could clearly see this abducens nerve and the facial nerve, and you could also see vestibular nuclei. So you could see all of these nuclei. You could see the nucleus of the facial nerve. You could see the nucleus of the abducens nerve. You could see the nucleus of the vestibular cochlear nerve. Here you cannot see the facial nuclei. You cannot see the abducens nuclei. You cannot see the vestibular cochlear nuclei. Whenever I'm saying the names, please try to recall them from memory and from the image as well, because I feel like visual memory is far more important than all of this, uh, rote learning. So if you have this in your mind that, yeah, in the diagram I saw it at this point, that would be really nice. So this is like the primary difference. And then rest everything is same. You could see pontine nucleus here also. You could see the pontine nucleus here, pontine nuclei here as well. Then what else was there? Was there anything special that you could also see transverse pontine fibers? You could also see transverse pontine fibers. Rest everything was same. Even the tracks, everything was same. So that's pretty much it. Um, this is a chart that you can have a look at. And if you want, I don't think there's any need to actually read all of this. But if you want, I can do that as well. And this is again your photo micrograph of the transverse section at different levels. So yep, that's pretty much it. Actually, I'm feeling like reading this, so let's read it. Medial lemniscus rotates as it passes from the medulla into the pons. Yes, its orientation changes. It is situated in the most anterior part of the tegmentum. Most anterior part of the tegmentum. So this is tegmentum. This is anterior. This is posterior. With its long axis running transversely. The medial lemniscus is accompanied by the spinal and lateral lemnisci. So spinal and lateral lemnisci are also associated with it. We're talking about the caudal. So even here you had the spinal lemniscus. That's another thing that it's not visible here, as visible as in the cranial transverse section, but it's there. Okay, even in the caudal transverse section. Facial nucleus lies posterior to the lateral part of the medial lemniscus. So posterior to the medial part of the posterior. So posterior to the medial part of the, or actually the lateral part. Yes, lateral part of the medial lemniscus. The fibers of the facial nerve wind around the nucleus of the abducens nerve, producing facial colliculus. The fibers of the facial nerve then pass anteriorly between the facial nucleus and superior end of the nucleus of the spinal tract of the trigeminal nerve. So yes. And then medial longitudinal fasciculus is situated beneath. Actually, these all are positions, so I don't think you need to read all of that. But I felt the need to read it, so I thought, why not? Let's go over it. And then just saying trapezoid body is made up of cochlear nuclei and the nuclei of trapezoid. That's uh, it. I think there's nothing more that you need to read from the theory. So yeah,